Hello, everyone, and welcome to our May 17th doctoral seminar to end the 2014-2015 series featuring Kim Foster, Kyle Jones, and Nick Thompson. Kim is a second-year doctoral student at Kennesaw State University, and she has been teaching English language arts for 6 years now. Her research interests are utilizing students' funds of knowledge and cultural identities in the classroom, and to explore how that informs and shapes their academic writing. Kyle is a second-year doctoral student at Kennesaw State University, and he has been teaching English language arts for 7 years now. His research interests encompass out-of-school and critical literacies, as well as student identity and agency formation. Nick is a second-year doctoral student at Kennesaw State University, and he has been teaching English language arts for 9 years. His research interests include student and teacher learning communities and collective intelligence. I am Kelly Bippert, one of the moderators tonight. I am currently a second-year doctoral teaching fellow at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Also, I would like to introduce Dr. Peggy Albers, Professor of Language and Literacy Education in the College of Education at Georgia State University. She is the founder of Global Conversations in Doctoral Preparation, as well as Global Conversations in Literacy Research. The Global Conversations in Doctoral Preparation, or GCDP, are mentoring web seminars that are designed by doctoral students for doctoral students. These seminars offer different perspectives on various topics related to the doctoral education experience. We are very excited to have doctoral students like Kim, Kyle, and Nick from Kennesaw State University to share their experiences with us. We welcome doctoral students from across the country, as well as internationally, to present these web seminars. We hope that these seminars will be extended into global conversations around doctoral preparation so that we can learn from one another with one another. These doctoral web seminars cover a range of topics. They can be research-based, so we can present our research, or we can present on some aspects of a doctoral program in our mentoring ourselves into the academy. Tonight's presentation by Kim, Kyle, and Nick, From the Water Cooler to the Firehose, Teaching Our Way Through an English Ed Doctorate, is one such mentoring session that will generate discussion focusing on pressures, the tensions, and the growth our presenters have experienced as teacher researchers. We are using Blackboard Collaborate, and I hope you will become familiar with the tools. Feel free to chat and ask our presenters questions by typing in the chat box. Our moderators will be collecting the questions as we proceed with the seminar. Right now, it would be great if you could share with us which part of the world you are joining us from. You will see a toolbar on your left where you can click on the star and drag it to place it on the map. Or if you like, you can type in the chat box. It is now my pleasure to present Kim Foster, Kyle Jones, and Nick Thompson tonight. Kim, Kyle, and Nick are doctoral students at Kennesaw State University. This evening, they will lead us a discussion on the pressures, the tensions, and perhaps most importantly, the growth they've experienced as teacher researchers. So it is with a great deal of pleasure that I introduce Kim, Kyle, and Nick, who will speak on From the Water Cooler to the Firehose, Teaching Our Way Through an English Ed Doctorate. You are on.
All right, hey everyone. Kim, do you want to get us started?
Kim, try hitting the talk button. Oh, so it's not working for you? Let's see if we can try something else.
Is it working now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, awesome. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it. We're excited to share with y'all about our experiences. The first thing we all kind of wanted to start with was sort of what's the real difference between pursuing a PhD and an EdD. And I'm going to kind of explain my story, and then I'll let Kyle and Nick jump on. For me, I didn't even really know an EdD existed until I started looking into it. I actually applied to a PhD program first and was accepted, but just for whatever reason, I kind of kept looking, and I found the EdD. And one of the things I really enjoy and like about the EdD is I have to be in the classroom. It's a part of the program, and I love having the research and the teaching go hand in hand. It's a lot of work, obviously, but it's really changing and shaping me as a teacher, and that's sort of what I like most about the EdD is being in the classroom, doing and seeing my research in action. What do you think, Kyle? Nick?
Yeah, I was similar to Kim in the sense that I didn't really know about the EdD even being in existence. I'd always thought if I pursued a doctorate, it would be a PhD. And me and my wife early on in our marriage had discussions about what that would look like, and what I came to the realization is when you get a PhD, you really have to go wherever the job is. And we've been so settled here in Georgia where our family is, and a lot of our future plans had to do with us staying in Georgia. So as I learned more about the EdD program at Kennesaw, it really kind of lit a fire in me that was the best possible option for me, that I could pursue certainly a degree that I wanted, but got to stay in the classroom, as well as knew that I'd get to stay local like me and my family would like to.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everybody. Yeah, the absolute difference between an EdD and a PhD is that the EdD is for practicing teachers. And I'm actually the opposite of Kim. I've started out in the EdD program, and I've since decided that a PhD is a better pursuit for me. So I've spent 2 years in the EdD program, and now I'm going to transfer to a PhD program because I realize that I don't want to try and split my attention between the classroom and my doctoral studies. I want to go full-time with the doctoral studies. And it's not without a little bit of trepidation, because there is a beautiful marriage between being able to look at what you are researching and then bring that into the classroom in an immediate real-time sense, and also bringing your classroom into your doctoral studies. So I think I'm definitely going to miss that as I make this transition.
Okay, just a little bit about why I ended up choosing the KSU EdD. Like Kyle, I've known I wanted a doctorate since high school. I love teaching. I love learning. I knew I wanted to be a teacher in 4th grade. So being the overachiever person that I am, I just figured if I was going to do it, I might as well go all the way. I had a professor in my master's program. She and I were having a conversation about how much I like school and being in school, and she said, well, if you like school that much, then you need to get your doctorate. And it kind of solidified it for me. And like I said earlier, I applied to a PhD program originally. I was accepted, and for some reason I just wasn't settled with my decision. And my husband, who is also an educator, really encouraged me to look elsewhere, look at other programs, look at other schools, see what else was out there, and I did. And I found the EdD at Kennesaw, and at the time, it was actually a different program. It was teacher leadership for learning. This was before the PSC changes, and I went and met with the professor there, and she talked through everything with me about the program, affordances, and constraints, and what would be good. And I knew that my husband and I were going to be moving, actually. And KSU was more centrally located than where I had applied, and I was really impressed with just the faculty that I had met, and so I applied and started the program. And I also chose it, like I said earlier, is it affords me the opportunity to stay in the classroom, which is really my passion and my goal is the classroom. And like Kyle said, with a PhD, you really have to go wherever the job is, and that is just not the case for me or for my family. My husband is a football coach, and his job is really the job that we follow. And I also I wanted more options. I wanted to be able to do more than just be in the classroom. Maybe teach college. Maybe do professional development. Maybe be a curriculum coach. Just have options. And we all are just going to talk a little bit about what our first week of classes were like. And I can just remember that first week in December of 2013. The first class that I had, my English class, was just like, whoa, over my head. I couldn't believe the language my professor was using, and I had to very, very quickly get immersed in that language and start to understand what is he saying, how to put the pieces together. And it took a little while. Looking back now, I'm surprised I survived, but I did.
So Kim mentioned this as well, just wanting a doctorate since I was in high school. I don't know what kind of insanity had leaked into my brain as a 15-year-old, but there was something about being called Dr. Jones that was really appealing to me. And then as I got older and I got into a career as an English teacher, I genuinely loved my job. I got a chance to start off at a high school that had a lot of means and a lot of ways of supporting me as a teacher. So some of the tensions that I think some teachers might feel normally in this first couple of years, I was really well supported. So at no time did I feel like I was in the wrong place or that I couldn't grow as a teacher. And really it stemmed out of conversations I had with KSU faculty going all the way back as an undergrad. As an undergrad, I knew that, again, that I might want to pursue my doctorate. So I started those conversations kind of early. And then by the time I had finished my master's, I had a colleague of mine approach me about how Kennesaw was revamping an EdD program for English teachers. And she really piqued my interest, so I started talking to some of the faculty members again that I knew from my undergrad time. And it wasn't long before I realized that the options the EdD afforded me to be able to stay in the classroom, definitely stay in state, and kind of research in the trenches, and not that there's anything wrong with being, I guess, in the ivory tower or being in the world of theory and seeing how that applies separated from the classroom, but I see a lot of value to staying as close to the classroom as possible, and the day in and day out activities of what we do, especially as English teachers. I feel like I can bring a lot more to the table that way. And as Kim was saying, that first week of classes, you're inundated with so much information, and whether it be theory or even practical research, there was a lot to try to take in all at once. But that being said, it immediately actively engaged me. I was challenged by all my professors to get involved immediately in conference work and my research and thinking about how I really wanted to make an impact in my school and community and beyond. So it was a very enriching experience all the way from the beginning.
So I mostly chose to go back to school because I've been teaching in the same environment for 7 years, and I realized that I was doing the same thing over and over again. I was looking for an opportunity to inspire me. I was looking for a new way of thinking and a new way of teaching. And when I saw the revamped program at Kennesaw State, I started to investigate exactly what that looked like and what it meant for me. One of the big benefits for me of the program at KSU is focus. And I knew that if I was going to go back to school, I wanted classroom time. I know that online schooling works for a lot of people, and that's great for them, but that's not my personality. I want to be in the classroom. I want to be in direct conversation with other students, and conversation with my professors. And KSU really afforded me all of that in a way that fit into my already busy teaching schedule. The other thing I liked about KSU is it had a built-in specialist degree. So not quite knowing what I was getting myself into, I knew that if there was a change that I wanted to make midway through, that I would have that degree on my belt and I would walk away with something substantial, and that turned out to be the case. So that was a real big positive for me. Also, Kennesaw State's on a cohort model, which was a big plus for me. I walked in with a lot of questions, and I wanted to be able to walk through the program with other people that could help guide me when I got confused or stumbled. And also, it's really nice to have a group of people that are going through the exact same thing that you are. We all started with many of the same fears and anxieties, and we all grew in different directions, admittedly, but at similar paces, so that we could really support each other. So personally, I love the cohort model, and our cohort has really gelled quite well through the leadership of our professors at KSU, and I really like that part of it. The last thing about the EdD is staying in the classroom, and I know we've said that a few times already, but it's amazing to take what you're learning in your classes at KSU and put them in the classes you're teaching at your respective schools, and then bring that back to KSU and talk about it with the other people in the cohort, your professors, and compare it to the literature that you're reading. And the conversation that happens between the classes that you're teaching and the classes that you're taking is, I have to believe, a unique and valuable experience.
We can't seem to hear you again, Kim. I wonder what.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, that's cool.
So sorry. I'll repeat myself. Like we said, being in the classroom, we really see some tensions between practice and theory. They don't always gel, which is, I think, maybe what Nick or Kyle said. One of the biggest things for me, which is actually kind of calming and reassuring, and that is the realization that even some of the most prestigious researchers, teachers, professors, they have outcomes that aren't intended or aren't successful. I think sometimes when what I have found, every things that we read, there's a victory narrative. Somebody does this awesome thing with their students, and it's beautiful, and it's great, and there's a nice little bow gift wrapped at the end, and it all looks pretty. But what I found, two of my favorite researchers, Morrell and Smagorinsky, they openly admit that they may try something with students or with graduate students, and it doesn't really work the way that they intend or hope, or maybe it's different or better, and that's reassuring. As a student, I find that maybe I've tried something in my classroom that doesn't go as well or whatever. I feel in good hands if somebody like Morrell and Smagorinsky are experiencing the same thing. Also, my second point took me a while to sort of piece together, and that is that theory is not linear. That's the way my brain works. I want things to go lockstep, A, B, C, D, E, or, this happened in 1990, and this in 1995, and this in, 2000, and that's just not how theory works. There are different people writing at different times in different countries, and their ideas build on each other, or they take from each other, and that's really taken me a while to really process and to understand that people were building on each other, that it's not linear. And also, the last one is what I've seen the most tension, and that's especially in a cohort of students. There's probably anywhere from 9 to 11 of us at one time. People are taking different classes kind of as they can, and that is, we all come from different schools. Some of us are in very privileged schools. Some of us are in very diverse schools. Some of us teach middle school. Some teach high school. We actually even have a female that's in our cohort that teaches upper elementary. And when you talk about a theory, or you talk about a strategy, or you talk about whatever you're reading and you're doing in your classroom, it looks very differently. Like there's a girl in my cohort. She and I just finished a directed study together, and we have very different schools. So taking up a sociocultural lens and looking at our different classrooms, it looks very differently from her than it does for me. She's at a very privileged school. I'm at a very diverse, culturally, socioeconomically, at everything, and so it's very different. So one theory or one idea doesn't look the same across all schools and all people.
Yeah, the theory component was certainly eye-opening and foundational for me really early on As I started to learn more about the Frankfurt School and looking at critical theory, it took a long time, easily a year and a half, for me to wrestle with what camp I felt like I was really a part of when I was thinking about my practice, what I do as an educator, and what I was learning about the theory behind how we educate, why we educate, the purpose of education, and what we're trying to do, especially in a modern context. But critical theory really kind of jumped out at me because I loved the point that the idea was something needed to change. It wasn't just about observing that things were happening, but that a change should come out of that research or from what we were doing with the information. So, and I also learned really early on that, theory really can't answer my questions, in my teaching context, because each context can be so diverse, which, can be problematic, I think, for a lot of reasons. Even as an educator, as open-minded as I am, I wish there were things that we could kind of come up with that traversed multiple contexts, but we deal with human capital. And human capital, the context does change everything. And so theory helps, is what I learned, but it doesn't answer a lot of my questions. However, a lot of strong practices that I learned, so Sheridan Blau, for instance, had a profound impact on me. His literature workshop, when we studied that in one of the courses, I ended up using a lot of his practices that he kind of did in his own research and with his undergrad students with a lot of my freshmen in high school. Certainly, changed things to where it was more applicable to that learning stage in their lives, but it was extraordinarily impactful immediately. My ability to get my students to reflect, make them more reflective writers, more reflective participants, and me being a more reflective practitioner, all came out of studying and looking at people like Blau. And then ultimately I've landed on this whole world of critical literacy and participatory culture as a theory too, where this idea of remixing information, having literacy that ultimately has an impact and again changes the presence of what the student is enduring or feeling or impacting, and that there's audience involved with it. All of that has really arisen out of that critical theory that I was looking at early on and where I'm at now and what I think I'm trying to pursue potentially in a dissertation.
Yeah, I think both Kyle and Kim touched on this, but the theory that you read about is sometimes generalized, and sometimes it comes out of contexts that don't reflect your own teaching situation. So it's sometimes hard to see how a specific theory or specific practice that you're reading about in your coursework meshes with your own teaching practice. Another thing that I found in my reading is that we as teachers are very much concentrated on our own beliefs about our teaching. I mean, I've never personally met a teacher that would describe themselves as a bad teacher, but I've also personally never met a teacher that couldn't point to somebody else in their building that they would describe as a bad teacher. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. Clearly, we can all be better as teachers, whether we're good teachers or great teachers or bad teachers, but we all seem to share this idea that what we are doing in our classroom is good. So sometimes the tension that is present is that we don't trust what is being researched from an outside source. It's not teaching in our context, and we have a hard time imagining how to translate those theories or those practices into our context. We tend to trust the people around us. Personally, the first couple of years of my teaching career were shaped by the other teachers in the department with whom I was teaching. I chose to read the same things they read. Many of my assessments were, if not copies, at least very close reflections of the assessments that they were giving. The activities that I was doing in my classroom were very similar to the activities they were doing in their classroom. And partly was because I didn't have confidence in myself as a teacher. I didn't have confidence in my knowledge of the profession. And I did have confidence in their experience, so I found myself copying them a lot. Now, as I've grown, as I've become a more experienced teacher, I find myself moving away from copying them and inventing stuff on my own. But until I got into the program at KSU, I wasn't looking for expert opinion. I wasn't looking for data-driven practices. I wasn't up to date on, current educational theory, and that's really what was missing from my practice. It was very much a belief system, and it really had no basis in any kind of a good theoretical or research-based practice. And that's what I really love about going back to KSU, and what I was hoping I would find is good research-based practices that I could then bring back to my own classroom and have more confidence that I was doing good things for my students.
So each of us saw immediate change within our school as soon as we started the program. One of the biggest things for me that makes me unique in this cohort is that I've been in 3 different schools in the 3 years of the program. I actually started taking classes the fall of 2012 and then actually formally started the program in December of 2013. So I've been in 3 different schools. So my first school was a middle school where I was in a leadership position. My second school was a high school where I taught 9th grade in American literature. And in my present school where I teach 12th grade advanced composition. So each school has sort of a different dynamic as far as teachers being receptive or not receptive to what I'm doing. I will say where the teachers are confident and excited and progressive and wanting to try new things, they were very receptive. They were excited to hear about what do you mean cultural identity? What do you mean funds of knowledge? What does it look like in my classroom? How can I use that? What kind of activity are you doing to get students to write the way that you are and talk the way that you are? So I had a lot of that in my first 2 schools because the teachers were very excited, and it really fostered good conversation about some of the new things I was learning and that I was excited about. And some of them failed miserably, and it was good to have people that were nice enough to listen to me and to help me through it. But at my current school, I'm finding a little bit more resistance. The teachers are more set in their ways about what they are doing and how they are doing it, and I'm new and excited, and it's not really received as well. Some of the new, just using things like Google Drive and using language like funds of knowledge and sociocultural theory and getting students to push back. That's not something that's been as well received. I think they see that my students enjoy it, but I don't think they're very excited about it. I find myself more intentional, more purposeful, more confident in speaking with my administration at all 3 schools. That's not just unique to one school. I found myself just confident. I feel like I know what I'm talking about when I say we need to, have students writing multimodally, not just, the 5-paragraph essay. What are we really teaching them when we do that? And I have a, reason to say we should, we're preparing our students for a world that we don't even know what it's going to be like yet. So we've really got to break away from some of the older things that we've been doing, and just having that backbone and that knowledge to speak to administration has really been great. What I like most about the interaction with my school changing, and that's the culture of my classroom. And that's really that I'm not the only person in the room that has a voice. I feel like before this program, I did a lot of the talking. I did more direct instruction, and I've really clung to just the idea that meaning is constructed socially through conversation and working together and collaboration, and that's really some of the highest forms of learning for my students. And I really, really have enjoyed the way the students embrace it and embrace one another and each other's cultures and personalities and perspectives. And that's been my favorite thing, is that the culture of my classroom has changed so much, so quickly.
I can second a lot of what Kim was saying, too, inside my classroom. What's been really interesting for me is how this whole program has tossed me in a world of some sense of leadership that I just wasn't expecting. it really starts off with like that first point I have there about no longer being passive, and I kind of developed this whole impulse to act that every time I saw something happen in my classroom or happen in somebody else's classroom or in our hallways, or I saw something, happening around me, I remember distinctly going from the person who just kind of watched it to someone who wanted to do something about it. And I know that sounds really vague because of the pronoun it, but there's just so many things you could fill in that gap. What it ultimately pushed me towards is I was at that school that I mentioned earlier where I was really well supported. I was there for 7 years, and I had to leave. It continues to be a great school, but my role as a teacher leader was kind of pushing me in a direction where I knew I could kind of take what I was doing and have an impact at another school that wasn't too far away. Very different demographics. There's a lot more challenges when you're talking about some of the financial situations of students or the background. There's a history there that I can't quite go into because we don't have the time. But I was pushed into that school because of believing in what I could do at that school with those students, with the administration that was there, and that really that's part of what really challenged my whole tolerance for watching what I felt was ineffective teaching, or maybe even, I don't know, colloquial, like stodgy teaching, where there's one way of doing things, and there are really classic methods to instruction, I think, but I couldn't get bogged down with that when there are so many great innovative practices that can be integrated as well. And then ultimately this idea of, I realized that a lot of teachers I've worked with aren't heavily reflective in their practice, and that really bothered me too, because as I became more reflective about my practice, I really desperately wanted other people to be more reflective too. And so as I transferred over to this other school and I kind of got my feet wet with what I was doing in teacher leadership there, my day-to-day interactions with my administration really increased, and I just became part of the conversation almost unwittingly, and I've really enjoyed being part of the conversation. It was a little uneasy for me at first, if for no other reason than I really thought that all my talents were exclusively for the classroom, but I'm coming to accept that I may have talents that can help, multiple classrooms and not just my own. But it is kind of a weird feeling, and I still wrestle with it every once in a while.
Yeah, so unlike Kyle and Kim, I've been at the same school for now 9 years. So I basically spent my entire career in the exact same culture. It's a highly successful school. Our matriculation rates are really high. We send a lot of students to college and beyond, and we do very well on standardized tests. So there's absolutely a mentality at my school about stay the course and rest on your laurels and all that kind of thing. I work with talented and passionate teachers. I don't want to short sell what they do in this profession at all, but I don't see a lot of innovation. I don't see a lot of seeking, expert opinion and research in order to innovate within the school. Part of the interaction that changed for me is as I started to change my classroom to match some of the things that I was reading inside the classes at KSU, is I found that my classroom didn't quite reflect what my administration expected my classroom to reflect as it had in the past. So when they came in for their observations, or they were looking at the way I was communicating with my students, they often had, let's say, helpful notes that I completely disagreed with. So there were some tensions that were brought up between me and administrators, or maybe I should say the new ways that I was conceptualizing my classroom and the ways that they had conceptualized my classroom, and it became a little bit tough. Although going to class 2-3 times a week, having constant conversations with the other people in the cohort, I'll mirror what Kim was saying, gave me the confidence to have those conversations, to push back against the status quo and be assured in what I was doing in my classroom and why I was doing it. It also gave me resources to support what I was doing in my classroom that I previously wouldn't have had, and that feels really good. The other thing I found is I felt a little bit less connected to my colleagues. Like I said, early in my career at the school, I was highly dependent on them to give me assessments, to give me readings and writings that my students should be doing, to get activities that we should do in my classroom. And then I started to see different activities and theories that conflicted with what I had been doing, therefore what my colleagues were doing. And I found that I withdrew from my colleagues a little bit. I kind of went into my own classroom and did my own thing, and probably a little bit to my own shame, didn't engage them in those conversations. Certainly, they are professional people and intelligent people, and I probably could have benefited from those conversations, and hopefully they could have benefited from me. So a little bit of regret so far that I haven't brought what I'm learning at Kennesaw to my colleagues, but I have no regrets in the way that I'm letting what I'm learning at Kennesaw change my classroom, and even when it creates a little bit of tension between myself and the other people that I've been working with for so long.
All right, so the next couple of slides, we're just going to share a little bit about how the research has informed the practice in our classroom, but also after this, how our practice is informing our current research. So for me, the research that I've been, just like Kyle mentioned earlier, just inundated with continues to inform my practice. Especially in the beginning, every little thing that I heard I wanted to try. Every theory I read, I thought, oh my goodness, this will work in this classroom in this way and in this capacity. The longer I've been in the program, I'm starting to really see myself more so as identifying with sociocultural theory and critical theory, and how do I take that up as a teacher. And so I have a lot less hodgepodgey sort of teaching in a more solidified way. But I view my professors as people who are apprenticing me. They all have something to offer me. And one thing I really have enjoyed at Kennesaw is because the cohort model, and we've had some the same professors, they know me and they know my interests and they know where I'm kind of going as a teacher and as a professional, and they offer, different articles, different insight that's really particular to me and to my interests and to my classroom. And so I view that as them apprenticing me, which in turn helps me to view my students in the same way. How can I apprentice them? I teach the majority of seniors where I am currently, and this year I've really thought about how can I apprentice my students? Are they going straight into the work world? Are they going to college? What are they doing, and how can I apprentice them the way I am currently being apprenticed? For me, I jumped right into a pilot study, which Kyle kind of mentioned earlier. I think about a pilot study. The very first fall that I was in the program, I did a pilot study. Looking back, I feel like I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, having only taken one summer of classes. I was really leaning on very limited knowledge and understanding, but one of my professors really pushed me to do the pilot study, and I'm incredibly thankful that I did it. I got the experience of doing an IRB and doing interviews and getting the paperwork done from people. It was a good experience for just that part of it. But also the three people that I had read in my summer class were Mole, Gutierrez, and Paris. Just those were sort of the theories or ideas that I kind of jumped on. Funds of knowledge, third space, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and it really struck me and stuck with me. And so I had ninth grade students at the time, and really focused on bringing their out-of-school literacy, their funds of knowledge into the classroom to see how that would change their voice and persuasion. And honestly, what I really saw, I saw a more authentic voice in the end in their persuasive papers. But honestly, I just saw a higher, level of engagement. Students who were willing to listen to each other and hear each other's perspectives. What I had them do was we started with music. We brought in different music that represented different populations and different social issues, and listened to the music, talked through it. Then we did TV shows, videos, and it was just really interesting to see the culture of the classroom change. My students ended up calling it circle time. I didn't call it that, but they really bought into it and really enjoyed it. And it was really good for me as a beginning student to see some success as far as that goes. And honestly, the biggest way that research has informed my practice is I can never return to the teacher that I was before I started this program. I will never be the same. I will always have a thirst for the research. What is it saying? How can I use it in my classroom? What's new? What are people talking about? What are people doing? Just the conversations that I've been able to have with the people in my cohort, to be around other people that are as passionate as I am about teaching and about learning and making it better. I've really I've loved that. And just that my students' voices are much more important to me now than they ever have been. It's not just about me and standing in front of the room. It's about what do my students have to say and what do they have to bring to the table.
So for me, it's really come into, I mentioned this earlier about being a reflective practitioner and what that looks like, in the sense that every time that I decide to do something in my classroom, especially if it happens to be new, I'm trying to think about what impact I may be having on my students, how they took it up, how they might take it up if I'm looking ahead, for that matter. A lot of my research has also pushed me, as I had mentioned earlier, into a teacher-leader role, where I am expected to work with my colleagues, not just as, a comrade and someone who's in the trenches with them, but hopefully helping guide a little bit of their practice and their approach to what they're doing in their classrooms. And I'm becoming a little bit more comfortable with just general critique of, what I do well and what I don't do well, and I'm open to having conversations with people as they either observe me or they kind of see what it is that I've made or what I've done or what I've been doing with my students. I think a lot of times I call it the black box of education. I'm certainly not the one who's coined that phrase by any means, but we just kind of stay in our silos a lot of times, and when we do that, we get really uncomfortable with critique, and we feel like people are kind of coming down on us if people have anything critical to say. I've just kind of learned that that doesn't have to be the case. So that's definitely a big impact overall. I had mentioned Blau earlier and Jenkins, and both what they do either with a literature workshop or looking at the ideas behind participatory culture. I've spent a lot of time trying to develop these reflective processes for my students to engage in along with me. I've gotten to the point now where students, by the end of this year, started asking me, we'll be writing something or building something or doing something in class, and they pretty much immediately start asking us, like, well, there's going to be a reflection, right, Mr. Jones? Like, we're going to end up doing a reflection again, right? So it did my heart a lot of good that a lot of them were picking up on the importance of what we were doing with our reflective piece. And a lot of them didn't like it, because to look at yourself in the mirror is a hard thing to do, especially when you're a 15-year-old. When you already feel like everything you look at is a flaw in yourself. But they've gotten a little bit more comfortable with it, and they've started to enjoy remixing content. I worry sometimes that by me, causing them to do the remix, that it takes a lot of the fun that comes naturally out of using Twitter or Snapchat or some of the things that they kind of naturally do. But to purpose it and to give them an idea of who those authentic audiences are, that's really exciting for me. And for the students who have taken it up, I've seen some really interesting things in just what they do. Not even from a research standpoint. I'm not even collecting data yet, but just watching my students take up some of the practices has been really cool. So before I started the program, there's just no way that I would have put this kind of emphasis on the idea of process. I think a lot about the process of what my students are doing, rather than just their end results. If I'm lucky, maybe 1% of any number of students I teach will ever be lit majors or will be English teachers. So I like the idea of apprenticing them to that world a little bit, but I also like the idea that they really get into the process, and that's what they end up enjoying when it's all said and done.
Part of what my research through the program has done to inform my practice is that it's given me names and a chance to explore concepts deeply. So there was a class that we had in our first summer, and I remember that it was a class that none of us, maybe Kim and Kyle will disagree, but none of us particularly liked. We all begrudged having to go there, and we found it was a lot of busy work. So one of the assignments was it asked us to do a literature review on a specific part of education. And my literature review was focused on how discussion informs critical thinking, how it helps with reading comprehension. And I was given the terms dialogic classroom and also the term initiate response exemplified. And so just having those terms and the chance to spend the time reading about what they mean and what those concepts are highly influenced my classroom. I immediately started the next fall determined to create a dialogic classroom, or a classroom that reflected the characteristics of a dialogic classroom, and invite my students into the conversation and to direct the conversation, and also to frame how conversation exists within the classroom. Kyle's mentioned Blau before, and he just came through when we started reading him to further support the ideas of a dialogic classroom and the idea that the students should have authority over what is happening in their own education. It gave me the liberty to step back and to stop pretending like I was the expert of all things. I found myself saying things like, I don't know, more often. I found myself saying things like, let's find out. What do you think? I wasn't embarrassed to say, I hadn't thought of that before. Good point. And, being able to look into those concepts freed up my thinking as a teacher. And I think it freed up my students' experience in my classroom as well. And then to mirror again what Kyle said with the remixing when we started reading Jenkins, I never heard of thinking about communication as having different modes, or how those modes could be introduced in the classroom, or how students might take up those modes in order to express themselves. So yeah, the biggest way that the research has informed my practice is it's given me a chance to explore concepts that I didn't even have names for before, and really put them into my classroom and see what's going on, and then take that and bring what's going on in my classroom back to my cohort at KSU and talk it over and say, this is what's working, this is what's not working, and hear my colleagues who are reading the same things help me reflect on those aspects.
All right, and lastly, just we're all going to speak just a little bit about how our practice has informed our research. And as I've said before on multiple occasions, is I've had a huge desire for my students' voices to be heard and to be valued. I think in public education, I guess what I have witnessed, we do a really good job of beating students' voices out of them. We expect them to all write the same, speak the same. This is how we write an informational essay, and this is what it looks like for every student in every classroom in the whole school. And this is what an argumentative essay looks like for every student in every classroom in the whole school. And we really take out who the student is. What do they bring to the table? What is their upbringing? What is their culture? What are their funds of knowledge? And how does that, what implications does that have for the way that they communicate argument and communicate information and communicate, a narrative? Like, what does that look like? And I think just what I have read about, sociocultural theory and funds of knowledge, and it makes me want to, what do the students have to say? They bring something valuable, and I want them to feel empowered by what they have to say and not devalued. And especially because I've taught in very diverse schools, and so not everyone functions on, mainstream middle class America. And that, that meaning is socially constructed. I have always believed in group work and conversation, but I have a much more of an emphasis on, I want you all to make meaning together. And like Nick just said, being in a cohort really affords you the opportunity to hear what other people are saying about a text and how it's impacting them. And I think that's valuable for students because it makes meaning. That in and of itself makes meaning, and I've really enjoyed seeing that, and it's made me want to dig deeper into what that means and looks like. I also have seen a need for students to recognize and to act on just their world, to not take their world so passively, but to really, look at hard issues and discuss them. that, like Nick was saying earlier, and I think Kyle too, is give them the tools to push back against something that they see that, you know, isn't right, or they want to change. And I think students right now that I teach, they don't necessarily have the tools to do that, so they either do it, you know, aggressively, violently, or just don't do it at all. And so I think, you know, giving students the tools to, okay, how do I go about this? How do I recognize? How do I talk about this in a way that's civil? I've seen a real difference in especially my seniors this year, and giving them, you know, difficult conversations. We had debates this semester, and they chose the topics, and the two topics were abortion and gay marriage, and two topics in a those are two topics in a very I work in a conservative area that we could have just, you know, passed by the wayside, but I think because we did it later in the year, they really had the tools to have conversations with each other and to express their opinions. And like I said, and I've said throughout the presentation, is I've served a diverse population with various needs, and prior to this program, I was not meeting their needs. I was pretty much teaching all of my students the exact same way and hoping for the best. I knew they needed things differently, but I just really wasn't sure how to go about that. And when I read the first article about culturally sustaining pedagogy, which, you know, Paris and Aline are the forefront of that, it really struck me. We're not supposed to just be, you know, relevant to their culture and try to give them something to cling to, but we should be sustaining. We should be sustaining their culture and helping them find value in who they are as a student in your classroom with all that they bring to the room. And that's really been a huge shift for me, one that's not always well received, but I still push for it, and I still want that for my students. And it's hard. My husband's an educator, and we talk about this all the time. When you have a diverse population, it's easier to just teach one way, but it takes time, it takes effort, it takes thought, and that is hard. And I think that's why teachers push back. And sometimes I get lazy, let's be honest. It is hard, but it's so rewarding and meaningful for the students.
It's a great conversation, guys. We need to start wrapping up relatively soon. We're getting close to time, so if we can maybe in about 5 minutes wrap it up and have the audience submit their final questions.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, just, you know, and this slide actually here does a pretty good job of wrapping up, you know, some of the biggest things about, you know, connecting everything that's informed. You know, my approach to looking at the idea of unschooled or these unsanctioned literacy practice, these things that students do every day and they don't even realize that they're doing a lot of meaning making. You know, just watching a student the other day, watching, you know, someone else play a video game while there's commentary over it, and me asking them, you know, hey, do you just watch these videos or do you ever make them? And he said, well, I help a friend make these every once in a while, but a lot of times I watch them too. And, you know, this is a medium that they realize, they haven't even realized they've created this whole world of literacy around them just by doing stuff like that. So giving them opportunities to bring those practices in the classroom, and my hope being that by doing that, they can change their identity a little bit as an English student. That the non-reader sees themselves maybe as a reader, a non-writer or creator sees themselves as a writer or a creator. That's really what kind of energizes me as pushing me forward, is not stigmatizing these unschooled literacies anymore, but instead integrating them and finding ways to make them relevant to what students are doing and what, you know, we're trying to do as teachers.
Yeah, I think this is really where the beauty of an EdD comes in, when you're practicing while you are researching. I don't think I have heard anybody create a research topic or start to direct their dissertation that hasn't been directly inspired by what's happening in their teaching experience. For me, again, the biggest frustration, I came into the program with no direction. And the biggest frustration was that it took me so long to start looking at research, to start looking at theory, to start bringing good research-based practices into my classroom. And so I want to direct my research towards helping teachers do that, towards understanding why research is not making it in the classroom in a more consistent way, and trying to find a way to change that culture. Because I think useful and necessary, and it certainly had a major positive effect on my classroom, and I want to hear from Kyle and Kim and everybody else in our cohort. They feel the same way.
So yeah, everyone, that's the whole shebang, or we got through all our slides. So go team, way to go, guys.
Okay, thank you very much, Kim, Kyle, and Nick. We really appreciate your discussion. Do we have any other questions from our audience? Well, thank you for your questions throughout the seminar, everyone.
Oh, are you going to ask a question, Kelly?
I was actually just wondering.
Sorry, go ahead.
If anybody has any further questions, go ahead and you can post them on the chat box down below. Okay, well, thank you for your questions, everyone, and thanks for your great answers. Everybody, I saw that we were actually having answers to some of the questions as we moved through the presentations. It was wonderfully executed. Thank you very much. Let's all write something in the chat area, unless you haven't already.
Kelly, can I ask that question? If you had to advise students at KSU, would you support them in an EdD or a PhD once you get your own degrees?
Yeah, I think that the best advice is that's a highly personal question to ask, and I think the three of us have found different answers to that question. Kim originally started looking at a PhD, and I think Kyle said that he had two, and both of them found that an EdD was a better fit for them because they saw themselves as continuing in the classroom and that being the main focus. So an EdD was a smarter choice for them because it fit with their goals more. For me, I started in the EdD program, and I'm now transferring to a PhD because the experiences that I've had at KSU have really invigorated in me an interest in being a full-time researcher. So I'm moving away from the EdD, not because I don't love being a practitioner, but just because I see myself in a full-time researcher role. So I guess I would ask whoever might be asking that question, where do you see yourself? What kind of a teacher do you see yourself being? Do you want to remain in the classroom? You feel confident about that? And the EdD is absolutely where you should be because you can mix your research with your doctoral studies. If you feel like you want to be a full-time researcher, maybe a PhD is more where you fit in, but I'll let Kim and Kyle chime in.
From personal experience, I would advise whoever is trying to decide to go to the university and talk with some of the professors. That was the greatest help for me. Where I applied to the PhD, I went and spoke with 6 or 7 different professors and talked about their work and what they were doing and what was my end goal. And they asked me that, what was your end goal, and could this program meet that? And then I went to Kennesaw and talked about the EdD and what did it offer me, and that really helped me with having those conversations with the professors at the universities. If that's possible for whoever is pursuing, that's what I would suggest, is to ask the professors, what does your program have? What does it offer? This is my end goal. Can the program help meet my end goal? And that's really what helped me decide was what my end goal was. KSU's EdD was really more fitting for it than the PhD program, which is an awesome program. It just wasn't the fit for me, but I found that out through talking with the professors.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I could add much more to what they said. I mean, it's about conversations that you have with those who are running those programs, conversations with your family. I mean, I found a lot for me, my decision was made by having conversations with my wife, and again, where we wanted to be as a family and what we wanted to do. And because I wasn't overtly passionate about being a professor right away, it was an easier choice. But I will add this, that I think I would ask that person to consider where they feel like their talents are really going to improve the state of education or the world that they're trying to enter. Are they going to have the greatest impact in a classroom with those teenagers or with those young children, or by teaching them what they know and getting other future teachers, to think about their own practice? Will they have the impact that they need to have at that level?
Okay, well, thank you guys, everybody, for your questions and your answers. Thanks for the great conversations. And if anybody has any last final comments that you want to leave for our presenters, you can go ahead and type it in the chat box below. Thank you for participating in this web seminar. If you'd like to participate in a 15-minute online interview as part of our GCDP research study, please type your name and email address in the chat box below. Also, we would appreciate it if you could take our survey. The link is on the side, and it can also be found on our website. This series of GCDP is the result of the hard work of a team of doctoral students who are working together to create global conversations among like-minded people. As we wrap up this evening's seminar, please take a moment to follow us on Facebook, our WordPress site, Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All the links can be found on our WordPress site. Please share the information with your friends and colleagues. And thanks everyone for coming here tonight. We appreciate your presence and participation. We look forward to having you next time. Good night.